welcome to It's a Death Sentence. Today our guest is the Reverend Chris Kennedy. So we're delighted to have you. And you're a Church of England Reverend. So can you tell us about yourself?
Hey, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming to talk today. Great. My name is Chris. Born in South Africa, been in this country for 24 years, proudly South African, but that's also informed not only my faith, but the way that I've sort of perceived the world. Used to be a physiotherapist before I was a vicar.
Wow.
So I have been in the world of healthcare for a long time and, have had a series of interesting conundrums that have led me to being a vicar, but that's also given me a different perspective of maybe how faith and life intersect.
Okay. So I'm gonna dive straight in. I hope that's okay with you. As a man of the church, what is the first thing you think about when you think of death?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of the great privileges of my job, and I say it's a privilege because it's not seen as a privilege in many other sectors, is the capacity to be with people around the time that they're dying, to engage with their families, to be able to obviously, hopefully engage with the person that's passed away, but then also to put that person to rest. There's not many moments in your life where you can meet a complete set of strangers very often, but then also you might know them because they're part of your community or congregation, and be able to step into that really difficult space and hopefully provide hope. And that's when I go into all of these things. I never really try and do anything more than offer the hope that there is more than just the hope that they see in front of them at the moment. So I could easily say the funeral, or I could easily say, but I think it's the opportunity to be with people in their most vulnerable, that then death, it gives that sort of framework for people to engage with.
Wonderful. Would you mind expanding on what a funeral service looks like from your point of view?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a rite within the Church of England that has a construct, but because I have been surrounded by death in many different ways, including personally and then from my African perspective, I try and make it so that, especially at a funeral service, the people that are saying goodbye have that opportunity to do it their way. So I think the church in the past, understandably, has held on to a tradition, and that tradition has done well for a lot of people. But the process for us is that we say to them, well, what's going to make this day work for you? And how can you say goodbye well within these parameters? So you have to have a Bible reading, you have to have various different prayers and things. But once we get past those sort of must-haves, I'm really happy to sort of jiggle the whole thing around. We have a process of what we call a committal, which is a final saying goodbye, and then depending on whichever the family chooses in terms of is it a burial, is it a cremation, then you move around that sort of construct from there. I think it's changed massively over the last probably 20 years. It used to be that everything had to happen in the church. Obviously, we went through that really difficult time of COVID, where all of a sudden a lot of things had to happen in crems, which made us as vicars rethink the way that we were doing things, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm very
Shook it up a little bit, but for the right reasons.
And look, I've got no problems with shaking things up. I'm not here. I tell my congregation and I tell the people that I engage with, I'm really not interested in religion. I'm really interested in relationships. Mm-hmm. And the wonderfully difficult process of death is that you meet people where they're at their most relationally fraught. And you see the person rather than the thing that they want to be. So, yeah, I mean, the funeral service is a real blessing. And I'd also add there's a very distinct process of, if I know that person's had a living faith, and what I mean by that is that they're engaged in a Christian construct and are able to outlive their faith in a real manner, funerals can be joyous, amazing. A real blessing in a way, because you know, if you sort of believe in what is offered by Christianity and offered by Jesus, that this isn't the end, that there's hope, and that they're in a better place where there's no more pain, no more tears, no more difficulties. So there's a real sort of sense of joy. But then obviously I've also been in real difficult ones where families are divided over the death. The death has come to a child or a suicide, or there's multiple layers that come alongside this. And again, my job as the vicar is to be able to help that community of people and that family be able to say goodbye well, and so hopefully give them that sense that there is hope despite their loss.
And to come together, I suppose, at a difficult time.
100%. Yeah.
It's such a cross-section as well of what you're dealing with in terms of, like you've just said, the death, how it's occurred,
Yeah.
the type of people you're dealing with. You've got to have so many different heads, if you like, haven't you, to deal with different types of people.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's why I'm not interested in creating a construct, because you then miss the people, right? And my work in the NHS, my work in multiple charities, I do a lot of work in prisons where death is a very interesting construct, because it might not be that they'd be dying in there, but a lot of them have caused situations where death has happened. You can get lost within all of it, but when you see the person, be that the person that's dying or the person that is grieving, you see a person that's in need, and in that space you give them the best that you have in your capacity to do, because it's never easy, you know. Like if you're doing a funeral for a friend, or you're doing a funeral for a loved one, or you know, the most difficult funerals obviously are for children. I think in the past, people of my vocation would be struggling to show emotion, but I think the most beautiful thing that we can do in those situations is to show that emotion, is to show that authenticity, that this isn't just another person.
You're not stepping into that role, you're part of it.
Exactly, and you're human, right? And I think, you know, sometimes my counterparts try to distance themselves, and God bless them, I hope it works for them, but it doesn't work for me. What I'd like to try and do is be able to step in with these people and meet them in that place, to give them that sort of hope, and hopefully, you know, it's a strange thing, but you can find joy.
Could we just rewind slightly? You mentioned just a few moments ago that you work within the prison service. Could you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, so we're looking to try and work alongside prison leavers to be able to help them reintegrate back into society. Prison's a hard place. I don't go in there and try and revive and redeem people. It's a very difficult space, but it's a crazy problem in this country. It costs us £18 billion a year to deal with reoffending. And actually, that's £18 billion a year that we could then change major parts of our society. You want to fix the NHS, you start with reoffending. But the problem is that we as a society, or maybe a little bit like death, are very happy to put it to one side. Are very happy to say, okay, well, that's that over there. I don't want to deal with that because these people are there. But if you don't deal with it, it'll come back in some ways to come through. And so I've worked with some really tragic cases. I've worked in some of the major prisons in the country, especially with young offenders and with female prisoners. And it makes you feel incredibly grateful and blessed that you were born into the situation that you are, that then authentically I can then go speak to people that have never seen that construct and say to them, have you ever thought of it like this?
Do you find they engage more with you because you are willing to be more emotional with them?
Yeah, and I think they're also very much able to engage because a lot of them have hit rock bottom. One of my most sort of profound moments is every time you walk into a prison cell, you see the picture of when they were brought into prison, and often addicted, often abused, often in the height of their anger and rage. But then when you open the door and the person comes out, that's not the same person, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you can then be able to get past the image of what society says, and that's an understandable thing. These people have done wrong. I'm not sort of undermining that. But then when they walk out the door, it's just another person who admittedly, hopefully, has understood the brevity of their mistake, but are also hoping to change. But we as a society aren't very good at helping them to do that.
No.
Can you remember your first experience of death, personally?
I don't have grandparents, so there's I somewhat darkly joke with my wife that Kennedy women don't last long. They have, you know, I don't know if it's because they're married to some crazy men like us, but it's I didn't have a grandmother. She passed away, and that's kind of followed through. My mother passed away from leukemia when she was in her 50s as well. So I think my first experience of it was recognizing that other people had grandparents, which I didn't have. And it's interesting now that my two boys also don't have a side of their family as well because of loss as well.
How old were you when your mother passed away?
How old was I? Oh, I was in this country, so I was 23, and so I'm 42 now, so crumbs, work out the maths. But yeah, a fairly while ago. But I was one of the first people that I knew that had lost both their parents by 30. So my mother passed away from leukemia, and then on my 30th birthday, my father passed away as well.
Oh, no. Sorry. Let's talk about your congregation. So if you have a death within your community, with your congregation, how do you deal with that with them as a whole? So we're not just talking a one-to-one here, we're talking about you dealing with a mass of people. How do you approach that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on the type of person. We're blessed within the Church of England to have people that have been there for a long time. But again, the joy of the church, which is also its complicated piece, and you know, I want to be able to say that the church gets a lot of things wrong. So please don't say we got it right. But anyone's welcome, if you know what I mean. And so if you are rich or poor, you're welcome through the door, right? And I'm very anti the sort of elitist way that some churches go forward. I want to be able to open the door open to those people that maybe wouldn't feel like... I get a lot of people saying, I'll be struck by lightning if I come through the door. And I was like, well, listen, there's worse ways to go, my friend, so come give it a go, right? But the other side of it is that when someone passes away, especially if that person's been part of the family, and that's what church is, in effect, it's a family. Dysfunctional family, but a family...
like all of them.
Most, yeah.
Exactly. But I think it's that capacity to meet people, young and old, rich and poor, and bring them into something that's greater than themselves. So when you lose somebody, as in with that family, there's obviously a lot of heartache, right? But at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, if that person believes in what the Gospels say, what Jesus offered, then there's hope.
So just going back slightly, we've just learnt that you lost both your parents before you were 30, which is enormously hard. There's a lot of research, isn't there, around anything up to the age of 24. You're really still very young to lose a parent. So you've got your faith and you've got your profession. But how did you deal with that on a personal level? Did you use your faith and profession to get you through? Or did you have anger? You know, how did you cope with it yourself?
Yeah, all of it, I think. There were two very different experiences. I became a Christian in South Africa when I was at school through a course called the Alpha course. Lots of people have done it. And that's where I became a Christian, and it was easy to be a Christian there because I was in a very nice school and they told you when to sit and when to sleep and when to all the rest. So it was easy to be a Christian. I then came to London in 2001 thinking that I'd be here for a year, and 24 years later I'm still here. But I came and I think I did everything. I definitely did the sex. I didn't do the drugs, but I definitely did the rock and roll, right? So like, I wasn't necessarily here to... I was living a very vacuous life. Okay. And a life that then came through, that then when my mother passed away, I would have... If someone stopped me in the street and said, are you Christian? I'd have gone, yes, but was I out living Christianity? In no shape or form. But then when you lose... When Mum passed away, and she was an incredible woman... Mate, you shared a little bit of your story earlier where she was a biology teacher and she had a really strong case of leukemia come through. They said we need to treat it very quickly, but then she almost died from the chemo. And actually, I went to go see her. I flew back to South Africa, went to go see her in a state or in ICU where the doctor said, look, we think this has killed her. And so I said goodbye to her then. We had then the joy of her recovering, coming into remission, but recognizing, and this is kind of where my physio brain kicked in, that she'd only had one treatment of chemotherapy. So although it was great that she was in remission, the likelihood of it coming back was there. And my mother made an incredibly brave decision when it did come back then, that she said, I'd rather die from the cancer than die from the chemo, because then it's under my terms. And that's an incredibly brave thing to say to anybody, but also for us to be able to outlive that sort of process. And so she was the sort of faith pillar in my family. My father would nominally say he's Catholic, but I don't think I've ever seen him near a church ever. But that was an interesting thing then, and that's also a piece that we can maybe deal with later, is I would offer to say that the life that my mother lived, I would have a very good chance of seeing her in heaven, but because of the faith that I believe in, unless there's a grace that I don't know, and I pray for it, I don't know where my father is, because I can't guarantee that he's in heaven. And it's a really interesting space as a vicar to be able to offer hope to people, but also I want to offer reality to people, right? And so I think that's important for us to be able to think about. But yeah, I mean, when Mum passed away, lots of drinking, got myself into a lot of debt because I got given some money, great, but that money just was then used to buy rubbish that, filled a hole. But then actually from that space, good people came around me, time sort of came forward, and then it was through another Alpha course that a friend of mine who I was working with in the hospital, another physiotherapist, said, well, I'm going to this thing tonight. I remembered it when I was in school. I said, hey, do you mind if I come along? She said, fine. And that's kind of where my faith journey came back, and also that idea of God being part of my loss as well as my life.
Okay. So what do you think happens when we die?
Yeah, I was thinking about that on the way, because I don't think we think enough of it. I think we don't quite understand the gravity, the finality, the liminality, but then also the end of it, right? But that's a privilege that we have, rather than other nations. I had an amazing spoken word poet who went to go visit a slum in Kenya, and he said every morning the family that he was staying with, every single morning they wake up, they weren't sure that they'd survive the day. And here I am in this construct here, beautiful, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to survive the day. Now, I have no control over that, but it's just an interesting sphere that we in the West propagate this notion of death is somewhere, whereas a vast amount of the world lives with death right here.
At their door.
Right here, right at their door. And I think we take for granted healthcare, we take for granted health, we take for granted so many things that actually, as a healthcare professional, the fact that the amount of systems that have to work for me to take my very next breath, not to go out and be a vicar, not to go out and drive a car or whatever it might be, just for me to take that next breath, is massive. And that also reminds me, because that means that there's something created, right? All those systems don't just magically happen. We can argue science all you'd like, but I believe that there's that process that we have been created. And in that space then, I believe that then you do die, and there is a finality to it, right? There is an embodied reality of death, which Christianity would then offer is because of our disconnect from God. What then happens after that is where the great argument happens, right? My belief is that there is a process where we are then judged not by our actions, but by the fortitude of our hearts. So that's when all of a sudden you say a young child passes away, has never been able to do anything. Well, where does that young child go? Well, God sees that child, right? Doesn't see the auspices of their life, sees the person at their heart. And so my belief is that then our embodied nature finishes, but our souls, our spiritual being, our beingness is then being able to go and then put forward. So, yeah, I think that there's life after death. It's my very simple answer.
Well, interestingly, our next question is your interpretation of heaven and hell, and God and the devil. So for our listeners, I mean, this is historically, if we're brought up Church of England, Catholic, whatever, we've got this notion and it's kind of embedded in our culture. But for a lot of people, it doesn't really mean much. So what's your...
Yeah, less and less as well. I mean, you'd be surprised to think that a lot of people now are less churched, and that's understandably so because of the culture that we live in today and all the opportunities to do other things. But it's interesting to see God and the devil are an interesting construct of what heaven and hell is, if you know what I mean. So the simple thing is that the simple definition of heaven and hell, I think it's more profound, the hell definition, but heaven is where God is. But more importantly, hell is where God isn't.
Okay.
So I am not here about little fiery, pokey devil guys and a big furnace and all the rest of it. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. The reason that came through in the Bible in Hades is that's the worst place to be in a city, was where they were burning the dead. And that's where this idea of fiery furnaces came from. Can I then further go and explain what hell is? No, I can't. I'm not going to be able to do that. But one of the best descriptions of it is where God isn't. Well, that is hell. Because where God isn't in my world, and in my understanding, is that's a place where there's no hope. And the darkest place that I've ever seen, especially on prisons, is when there's hopelessness. It's a very different...
Humans without hope, that's a phrase, isn't it?
Yeah, man,
we've got nowhere to go.
And it's a real thing, right? It's a thing that's, when you're in that sort of place where you have nowhere to turn, well, that's the darkest place that you can be. And I think if you have that for an eternal nature, that's a scary place to be.
Hell on earth.
Yeah, and look, you've used this idea. There's a notion in when Christ comes back, right? So at Easter we celebrate that he has conquered death, and that gives us our hope. That's that freedom over death. But then he ascended into heaven, sitting at the right hand of the Father, interceding for us on our behalf. But then one day will come back to judge the living and the dead, right? And I think that's what we need to just be aware of. Sometimes Jesus is this flowery white guy with bunnies and butterflies around him, but he's also just, he's loving, he's merciful, but he is also the final judge, the author and perfecter of all of our faiths, the ones that we were created for and in. So I think when we look at it from that sort of side of things, heaven for me is that space where I'm with God. And a lot of the new thinking around theology is that when Jesus comes back, he will restore heaven and earth. Not take us away, but actually we were created to be in this space. So why would he then take us away from it? He will then restore us. But then, as I said earlier, those that don't have that opportunity to spend eternity with God will be elsewhere. Now, where that elsewhere is, I will not. I don't think it's in the depths of the earth.
But it's without hope.
Yeah, and it's without God. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because if you believe that you are created in the image of God, which all three Abrahamic faiths believe, right? So Judaism, Islam, and we all believe that we are made in the image of God, then all of a sudden, if you are separated from that God, it becomes an interesting place to think about, and quite scary in my book.
Absolutely. How do you feel about people who are maybe psychic or mediums? Have you had any experience with that?
The spiritual realm is real, right? And I've seen unbelievable things, and I've seen things that I can't quite comprehend, but I don't put it down. Look, we as Christians believe that we believe in spirit, right? We believe in the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit for me has done things miraculously. I mean, I've seen people come back to life. I've seen people be restored from incredibly difficult situations, which I believe is the Holy Spirit, the enactment of Christ in the world whilst he's awaiting his return. But then let's not kid around the other side of it, right? That there is evil, and the Bible's very clear to say that that the forces of darkness are battling the forces of light. And that's the interesting construct, that Jesus has overcome death, and one of the most profound days in the Christian calendar is coming up. It's Easter Saturday. So I have no idea why they call it Good Friday, because there's not much good about Good Friday, right? The guy is crucified. He dies. But where is God on Easter Saturday? There is a very good case to say, is God dead? We as Christians say that Jesus is God, and therefore if he is dead, if you've just crucified him, is God dead? My belief is that's the place of liminality, or that space of between the transcendent and the present that we're in. And that's where I believe Jesus has gone in, descended to the dead, to be able to free people from the gates of hell, so that then they can have the hope to be able to be restored. So, yeah, I think there is that sort of space of just making sure that there's hopefulness even in the midst of it, right?
I hope so. It certainly do.
Hope for us yet.
Coming back to you personally again, do you have any plans for your own funeral? Is it something you've considered? Do you have a will in place? Have you got a preference with cremation or burial?
Yeah, no, all of these are good things, and I should do, right? I probably don't. But,
Definitely should.
But again, it's an interesting thing, because I don't think you consider death at our age. And look, I mean our age is that I think when you start looking at that final frontier of your life, I mean, I remember turning 40 and I think, geez, I'm actually in the second phase of my life now, right? But I don't think I'm in that phase yet where I'm like going, come on, we've got to do it. But why shouldn't I, right? I see people all the time. I heard this very powerful story of a lady in our congregation saying to her son, I'll speak to you in the morning, we'll go buy a new car in the morning, and he just didn't wake up in his 40s, right? So, I know I've done a lot of bereavement counseling. We run a really good course called the Bereavement Journey, that is a Christian bereavement counselors, but for the first 5 sessions, they don't talk about faith of any description, and then the 6th session is optional. So if you're not of a faith provision, you've just had 5 weeks of really good bereavement counseling, but it's run in churches, and it's also then the final piece there. And that's been interesting to watch, because especially post-COVID, people have had a real need. I came to Tamworth and Arden from West London, and they hadn't had a vicar for a long time, so people were really struggling with bereavement, and always have. And we ran the course, we gave them hope, and I was just interested to see at the end who would come to the final session, because we're very adamant all the way through that you don't have to. And nearly everyone came back. Now, did they all come to faith? No, well, that's not the point. But at least they came to listen, because they met people.
I'm going to draw us back again.
Go on.
What about you, though? Do you have plans for your own?
No, not
Do you
at
have a
this moment in
preference?
time. I guess I quite like this idea of quite a natural funeral. Put me in a weaved caskety thing. Look, I guess I'll go back today and say that to my wife, right? Should we be able to talk about this? Not in a sort of weird way, but in such a way that then we can put things in place. But I remember my brother did this. He's 5 years older than me, and he last year did this process of going for a will and all the rest of it. And I was like, oh, never really thought of that. But again, that's our privilege, I think, because we don't have to at this time.
Yeah. Sadly, I see it every day at work. People come in, they think they're going to work, and they end up not at work, at my work instead. And
yeah, no, and it's so interesting, isn't it, to be able to. I remember my father. This is an encouragement for men. I've got a huge empathy for men, because it's really tough in all circumstances to be a man. The suicide rates in men are scary, but they also are very poor at engaging with it. I believe, on the whole, that women do it much better than men. They are much more aware of their emotional constructs, and therefore can be able to put things in place to be able to help each other. Whereas us men are like, right, there's the old the carpet, let's push it under there and not say anything, right? But I think for me, I just want to encourage men that, my father, after we we lost our mother, said, look, I'm going to just get to 65. I'm going to work really hard. I'm going to, put all these things. And when I'm 65, I will then be able to go and enjoy my life. And he lasted 2 weeks into his 65th birthday, right? And so, as well as sorting out your processes, because he died intestate. We believe, my brother and I, that he came to tell us about his will. We never found it. So we had to work all this stuff out, and that was difficult because he had investments in this country and in South Africa, so it was two different systems that you're working out with no will. But I think my father knew he was going to die.
Interesting.
And that's why he wanted to tell us. But I didn't think he was going to die then. But it was so interesting that when he died in a place near Nice in France, a place called the Camargue. I had to fly out there and go identify his body. Some interesting things happened there. That then the morgue was on Kennedy Street.
Wow.
In France.
Creepy.
Yeah, that was weird. And then, but that was hopeful for me, actually.
Yeah.
So for me, that was another sign that there was something there. And then when they said, have you got any documents to prove that, and they'd just given me his bag his sort of rucksack, and in his bag was everything. His marriage, his birth certificate, and I was just like, have you got anything? I was like, yeah. And I just kept on rolling this stuff out. I had no idea it was
So
there.
this is what brought you to think he knew he was going to die?
I mean, I just think he knew that, on reflection, his blood pressure was sky high and you could see it, right? But I didn't think he'd pass away then. We were talking about going to the West Indies to go watch cricket together, right? Like this was years to come. But the fact that he had something in his bag allowed him to be able to say that. But then that final piece is, and this is the chair that I read my stories to my boys in every night, because now they have no grandparents, right? They have my wife's grandparents, they're amazing people, but they have nothing of my family. And so we have this chair, and I was working for a charity helping offenders restore furniture. And the guy, the manager said, oh, Chris, we're so sorry for your loss. And I said, do you mind if I just buy that chair? I really like that chair. And he said, yeah, sure. And he said, I'll give it to you at discount. Rang it up and said, it's going to cost this. And to the pound, I pushed my hand in my pocket, and there was the money. I found my father's wallet, and to the pound was the amount of money to pay for that chair. The manager didn't know how much I had. I didn't even know I had the wallet. It wasn't even in but literally to the pound, I was like, wow.
It's a sign.
Yeah.
Well, again, signs. And, you can see signs in lots of ways, but yeah.
If, God forbid, it was all to end tomorrow, is there anything that you would like to have done with your life if you had more time?
No, I've been blessed. I've lived lots of lives. Like I said, I haven't always been the most upstanding person, and that's why I go back to prisons often to say, listen, I'm not here to judge you. I've seen the other side of life, and I'm here also to tell you that there is another side of life, but I'm also not going to condemn you for it. But I often think that if here's the other way of thinking it from a Christian perspective, if the Lord comes back tomorrow, so it is the end. It's not an end that is just a death, but, we just don't know when it's going to happen. It could be thousands of years, it could be tomorrow or this evening. Have I lived a life that has been one of blessing and of authenticity? Then I can say yes. So yeah, I don't think I wouldn't go back and say I'd need more time. Obviously I'd miss my kids and my family, but in terms of life, I've been blessed.
That's lovely.
So Chris, if you could find out when you were going to die, would you want to know?
Yeah, I've got no problems with it, because I think what's also really important from a Christian outlook is that death doesn't scare me. As I said, I've been in spaces where people who have faith have died, and it's been a very hopeful thing. I've just interred a lady's ashes in our church, and I was there moments before she passed away and felt a real sense of peace. So, would I want to know? Yeah, why not, man? I'd still live a good life. I'd still go out. I don't think often people would say yes to that question to then be able to go into a version of I've got to do all these last few things, but I think I'd rather seek it as a way just to say, okay, well, these was what I have left. Let's honor the people that I love, but also do the things that have brought me love and life. And that's always been helping the least, the lost and the broken. So I'd say, look, let's try and help as many people as we can.
That's nice.
That's amazing. And it's been so lovely talking to you today. So thank you for joining us.
No problems. Thanks so much for having me on.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
Cheers.